Take the time to make some sense of what you want to say, and cast your words away upon the waves, and sail them home with acquiesce on a ship of hope today.
Welcome to the Microdot YouTube channel. In this, the first episode, I'll be detailing the history of the Oasis logo. For those of you not familiar with the work of Microdot, we created all the record sleeve artwork for Oasis in the 90s, from Supersonic all the way through to the Masterplan, beginning with the iconic logo. I'll drop links in below in the description for all our social media platforms, and we also have a physical shop in Kendal near the Lake District. I'll be detailing the history of the Oasis logo today, right from its early beginnings, before I was involved, to the finished article that we all know and love today. So it began with this, the now legendary Union Jack swirl cassette, of which 10 were made. I was given one of these by Noel back in '93. We'll get to what happened to that later. But the logo itself, the original logo, was commissioned specifically for this cassette release. And Noel asked a friend of the band called Tony French to design the logo. This was back in the day before the internet, before everybody had a laptop and everybody was a graphic designer. So to be a graphic designer, you actually had to be a graphic designer and work in a design agency where they had the equipment to do the job. And Tony worked at a company called the Layout Pad. So the brief from Noel was he wanted a logo that incorporated the Union Jack. Now, you might have seen a video doing the rounds of them all rehearsing in the boardwalk rehearsal space, and there's a Union Jack painted on the wall. I'll drop a picture in now. But I can just imagine the scene, you know, it would have been, can you imagine how loud it would have been in that room? Double loud, bonehead there, thrashing away, full belt, they're all stoned out their heads. And Noel says to Tony, use that Union Jack motif to come up with the logo. So you've got to bear in mind, this is before, like I said, before the internet and before digital manipulation, well, not before, when digital manipulation of imagery was in its infancy. I mean, nowadays you can slap a filter on anything. Back then it was not as easy as that. So Tony took the Union Jack motif and he put it into a program called Quark Express, and he came up with this swirl, and he said to me, because I spoke to him the other week about this before doing this, he said he knew he was onto something. So then he applied the type and he took it back to Noel and he was made up. And his concept behind it was there's this vortex that Oasis mind-bending music would take you through to the other side. So he shows it to Noel. And Noel says, oh, it looks like the flag going down the sink, you know, going down the plug hole, like the state of, and his idea was it just shows the state of British music and Britain at the time, basically. And Noel asked Tony, could he put a plug in the middle of it? So Tony obviously thought this was the worst idea he'd ever heard, and he went away and he finished designing the rest of the inlay, and he decided to omit the plug, so a generation thanks its lucky stars. So once the logo had been approved, Tony then went away and designed the inlay, which contains all the recording info, track listing and so on and so forth, which is astonishing when you bear in mind that 6 of these tracks went on to be on Definitely Maybe, from what was effectively the first ever demo session, which I spoke to Bonehead the other week and he confirmed that. So then Tony runs off 10 of the cassettes from the master cassette in Griggs's bedroom and prints off 10 of those inlays. That is one of the original 10, by the way. This here is a replica that was issued in 2014 along with the remastered box sets. And what I always try and do is do something just subtle to differentiate the two. So the original has Oasis Live on the spine, the reproduction has just Oasis on the spine. And you might have noticed this, I did with Definitely Maybe as well. There's a 1994 Creation Records original copy, and this is the 2014 remaster, and the difference is there's a white border on it, so you can see straight away which is the remaster. But yeah, history. Talking of history, right behind me here is the mixing desk and reel-to-reel tape machine that session was recorded on. So I mean, this is just mind-blowing. I'll give you a better look at it I'll just film a bit on my phone for you. But look at that. This was what was used to record the very first ever Oasis demo. Absolutely mind-blowing, that. Yeah. Yeah. And here's some more history. On this 1/4-inch spool of tape here is the first ever recording of Rock and Roll Star and Columbia, taken from, well, it was that session. And the version of Columbia went on to be the white label demo, which was in turn the first ever Oasis track committed to vinyl. So absolutely astonishing history here. So I suppose you're wondering how I came to be in possession of all these incredible artefacts. Well, the session itself, back in the day, was recorded by the band The Real People, or more specifically the Griffiths brothers, in Liverpool. And they kept hold of all this stuff, and it's subsequently passed into the possession of Brian Garcia, who owns the world's biggest Oasis collection. So I went along to The Real People's mother's house in Bootle, actually, to pick it all up, and here it is. Anyway, back to the logo. The next milestone, I suppose, is Oasis getting signed. The cassettes. One of these cassettes was given to Alan McGee the night that he saw him, although he said he didn't need it. He was convinced just by the live performance. But that was the 31st of May 1993 at King Tut's in Glasgow. So just less than a month later, well, 3 weeks later really, at the 18th of June in Manchester, they played the Hop and Grape Bar at Manchester University supporting Dodgy. Here's the ticket. I believe there's been some sort of misunderstanding with the actual date is, but the date's on that ticket, and it was the 18th of June. And that is another milestone insofar as that was the first time Oasis ever sold official merchandise at a gig. And that was it. That was the first ever Oasis t-shirt, which was replicated later. I'll show you the differences on the reissues. But that night, the Oasis merchandise guy was Bonehead. And he tells me that the first time Oasis merchandise ever went on sale, i.e. that night, they sold one t-shirt, and I got given that. So 2 t-shirts went. That was the second Oasis t-shirt in history to go over the counter. Little hole in it there. But yeah, that's that. The reissue t-shirt, based on the same design, i.e. the swirl logo, looks like this. And what they've done is, for legibility purposes, they've knocked out the text. So it was just an outline on the first one. Like you can see there, it's just a faint line that says Oasis. On the reissues, it's more of a solid thing. And those are still sold today. They've just come out again. Those are being sold today, so it's a lasting design, obviously. The night that I got given that t-shirt by Bonehead, the first night that Oasis merchandise was on sale, was the first time I ever saw them play. And also at that gig was Marcus Russell, who became the band's manager, because they'd been told straight, when McGee saw him in Glasgow, who's your manager? We don't have a manager. Well, you better get one. And Noel spoke to, I think it was Johnny Marr's brother, who put him on to Johnny, who in turn recommended his manager, Marcus. So Marcus and Johnny Marr were at that gig as well, along with about 3 other people, one of whom bought a t-shirt. So I'm involved by this point, and Noel's asked me to design the artwork, basically based on the fact that he'd seen what I'd done for the Verve earlier. And the first job I went about doing was considering the logo. And I hadn't come up with any specific ideas when I first went to meet them all, but this kind of had to go because it didn't work that well in black and white, and especially pre-internet, when magazines that you would add press ads in were in black and white, it had to stand up in black and white. And if you think of all the classic logos of all time, they're just pure black and pure white or will work in pure black and pure white. McDonald's, Nike, the Oasis logo, you name it, it has to be a pure black and white logo. So that was the next thing, or the first thing on the list that I had to address. The next major point in the timeline would be the 28th of October 1993, when Oasis was supporting the BMX Bandits in Sheffield. And I went along to the gig, and I think it was the first time I met them all as a band as a whole, in any sort of creative capacity, really. And I took with me, something I don't very often do, I took with me a book of record sleeves, not to get ideas, but just to work out what they did like and what they didn't like. So this book was full of classic album covers, and in that book was this album sleeve. Now, it's the Stones' second album. I don't know if you can see that. I'll get it close up with my phone in a second. But what blew me away by this was there's no type on the record. It just has the picture of Rolling Stones and the Decca Records logo. Because back in the day, back in the 60s, I should say, the record company would put their logo on the front of the record. So I thought it was incredibly bold for, especially at that time, a record to have no text on it. So that's kind of what gave me the idea. I mean, it's not like I ripped off the Decca logo, because there's the box logo idea, there's loads of them. EMI had one virtually identical. But what I was inspired by was the positioning and the fact that there was no text saying the name of the band or sort of the name of the record or anything else like that. So that's where the first Oasis record. But I look back at it, I just think that's a tiny bit too small. But you get the idea. That's where it came. And that's why it is known as the Decca logo, which you'll see when they're selling T-shirts, because it was the Decca Records logo that inspired it. So then I've got the concept of this box logo in the corner. And the idea behind that was, because I would spend so long coming up with the ideas of the image and, getting that together, I just thought it's a catastrophe to damage it all by putting typography all over it. So I just wanted a succinct branding, a corporate branding, if you like, which hadn't really been done to that level with the band that I can think of. I'm sure somebody will point one out. So that's where I was coming from with the box logo idea, that's kind of corporate branding in one corner to keep away from damaging the rest of the image that I'd spent so long conceptualising and staging and having photographed. Ruining it by putting loads of type all over it, which a lot of record companies would insist on, but Creation was so cool they just let us get on with it. So then it was a case of deciding which font to use and the typographical style within the box logo. Now luckily Oasis is a very short word. I mean, this treatment would not have worked for Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, for example. So then I started experimenting with different fonts, and this was a logo, a history print that I did for a collectors group on Facebook. And you can see I started off pretty much with, that's a font called Impact, which isn't exactly what the Decca Records logo was, but it's a similar kind of compressed font. But I just thought, for the height and the spacing of it, it just didn't fill the box enough. So then I changed it to Accidents Grotesque Bold, which is a forerunner to Helvetica, and was used by my typographical hero Josef Müller-Brockmann a lot. But like it says on here, I dismissed that as well because it was just too in-your-face, too full-on capitals. So going back to the lowercase attempts again, this time we used a font called Futura, which is an approximation of what the Adidas font is, the Adidas logo, for obvious reasons. And that wasn't quite right. So then we get to what I call the prototype stage, which was this, which is an italicized version of the Futura. This actually went as far as ending up on a mock-up of Supersonic, which I did after a session down in Mono Valley Studios when they were doing the first recordings for Definitely Maybe. And this is the original here. That is it. That's the only copy of it in the world. That was the one that appeared on the mock-up, which that is a direct scan of. You might have seen prints of that. But that is it. That's the first ever mocked up Oasis logo in history. But that was rejected, all by me. None of this got as far as Noel. I was just rejecting, I was self-rejecting, you know. I didn't like it. I was only going to show Noel when I was completely happy with it all. And there's another point, actually. This was not a band decision either, you know. It was always just a discussion between me and Noel was the creative element to the sleeves. So I basically knocked that back because from a distance it looked too much like Oasis. So I'm thinking again, what comes next then? I thought, well, it's a case of legibility now, because that works all right big, but once you shrunk it down to the size in the corner of the sleeve like I talked about before, that's when the legibility issue came about. So I thought, well, what's the most legible font in the world? Generally accepted to be so, Helvetica. I mean, if you look, the New York City subway system uses Helvetica. Why is that? Because it's the most legible font there is. Now, I spoke to Tony French about when he did the original, and he said that was Helvetica. That isn't actually. I'll show you the difference. It's very subtle, but there is a difference. That's actually Universe Black. The finished Oasis logo is Helvetica Black Italic. And I'll show you the difference. There's the A on the Union Jack Swirl version, and there's the A on the finished Decca box logo version. Very subtle, I know, but there is a difference, and that's just for your typography geeks. I mentioned earlier that there were only 10 of these original cassettes made, and I was given one. Here's what happened to it. Noel gave me this, and then I played it to, and it blew me away, and I played it to Richard Ashcroft, who was equally blown away by it. And it was that tape, that was the connection that got Verve and Oasis together. The fact that I was working with both bands at the time. So I went back to Noel and said, oh, Richard's really into it and he wants you to support him on the next tour. So that became the tour of '93 that the Verve, Oasis supported the Verve, or Verve as they were known then. And I had this cassette in my car. I had a little Renault 5, it was the first car I ever had. And me and Dave Halliwell, the Verve's manager at the time, set off to follow the bands around the country. And in the cassette player in the car, because there was no CD player or Bluetooth or any of that nonsense back then, it was just cassettes. So we had this playing in the car, non-stop the whole tour. Absolutely hammered it. Anyway, the tour finishes, a few months pass, and the car's past its best, and it's time to have it scrapped. And you can guess what's coming next, can't you? Yeah, I sold the car to a scrapyard for 50 quid. Now bearing in mind, the last one of these that changed hands, because there's only 10 of them, went for 6,000 quid. I scrapped the car and left the cassette in the car. So I sold the car for 50 quid to the scrap man, and there was a cassette worth £6,000 in it, which was probably more than the value of the car in the first place. But hey ho, I have the memories. So that's what happened to my cassette. Now here comes another purely microdot story. I decided then that we were going to go with Helvetica. In the box logo, it's all done. Now, I didn't have a computer at the time, and I didn't even know how to use one anyway. But my sort of right-hand man, my assistant, the microdot stalwart, Matthew Sankey, was in charge of all digital. And Matthew was still at college at the time. He was at Blackpool and Fylde College. So the Oasis logo was conceived that night in Sheffield, was designed up in Wigan, in my bedroom, and was actually digitised at Blackpool and Fylde College. Now Blackpool and Fylde College didn't have Helvetica Black Italic, so Matthew had to skew a copy of Helvetica Black to Italic to get the finished version. And that's how it was done. The finished thing first saw the light of day on the first release, obviously, which was Supersonic, released on the 11th of April 1994. But the first time that logo would have been seen in the public domain would have been the week before, when it was in press ads in The Enemy and The Melody Maker. from the beginnings of the Union Jack inspired swirl cassette by Tony French right up to the microdot design we all know and love today. So there you have it, the history of the Oasis logo.